So, when it comes to managing Parkinson's disease, you've almost certainly heard the buzz around CBD. I mean, it's everywhere, right? It's talked about like it's this potential game changer for, well, for everything from tremors to anxiety. But what's actually real and what's just noise? In this explainer, we're going to try to cut through all that confusion and really look at what the science has to say, sorting the genuine hope from the marketing hype.
This is the big question, isn't it? It's on the minds of patients, their families, and frankly, a lot of doctors too. The internet is just flooded with personal stories and some pretty bold claims. So our goal here is to separate the fact from the fiction by looking at the actual hard evidence.
Okay, so before we dive into the studies and the data, we've got to make sure we're all on the same page. So let's start with just a couple of quick but really crucial definitions. First things first, and this is the most important distinction we can make. CBD is not the same as THC. Cannabidiol, or CBD, is the component of the cannabis plant that is non-psychoactive. Let's be super clear, it won't get you high. THC is the stuff that does. For the rest of this conversation, our focus is 100% on CBD.
So how might CBD even work? Well, it's thought to interact with this incredible network inside our bodies called the endocannabinoid system, or ECS. You can think of the ECS as this kind of master regulator, helping to keep everything in balance, from your mood to your movement. And here's the real kicker. Studies suggest this very system gets altered by Parkinson's, which is exactly why scientists are so interested in it.
So with that basic science in mind, let's get to the exciting part. Let's dig into the promising evidence that has really fueled so much of the hope and the optimism around CBD as a potential therapy.
The buzz really started right here in the lab. These early studies, way before any human trials, show that CBD has some pretty powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. Now, for a condition like Parkinson's, where inflammation and cell damage are key problems, the idea that a compound could potentially protect brain cells, well, that was incredibly exciting.
And this potential we saw in the lab started to point towards some of the most challenging non-motor symptoms. Take psychosis, for example. It can affect up to half of all people with Parkinson's. In one very small, early-stage study, just 6 patients saw their symptoms decrease after taking CBD. Look, it's far from definitive proof. But for a symptom this difficult, that's a really significant glimmer of hope.
And it's a similar story for sleep. REM sleep behavior disorder, or RBD. That's where people physically act out their dreams, is really common. Another tiny case study looked at just 4 patients with RBD. The results? They saw a rapid and substantial reduction in their symptoms. Again, we're talking small numbers, but those results are so compelling they basically demand more research.
And then you have anxiety, which affects a huge number of people with Parkinson's, nearly 2/3. And here the evidence gets a little bit stronger. A 2020 clinical trial put patients in a stressful situation. They had them do a simulated public speaking test, and they found that a 300 milligram dose of CBD significantly reduced their anxiety compared to a placebo. So this gives us a little snapshot of how it might work under real-world stress.
Okay, so you can see why there's hope, right? Especially for those non-motor symptoms. But now we have to pump the brakes and apply a serious reality check to all the marketing hype. And that reality check, it all starts with one single surprising number.
7. That's it. I really want you to let that number sink in for a second. For all the thousands of articles and products and claims that are out there, the entire body of clinical research on CBD for Parkinson's rests on just 7 trials. This one number is probably the most important piece of context for everything else we're about to talk about.
So what did those few trials actually find?
Well, when it comes to the core motor symptoms, the tremor, the stiffness, the slowness of movement, the results have been really clear and consistent. Across multiple studies, CBD has shown no significant improvement when compared to a placebo. Now, to be clear, it didn't seem to make things worse, but it didn't make them better either.
All right, but what about those non-motor symptoms, where those smaller studies showed some promise? Well, when you look at all the clinical trial evidence we have so far, the results are officially considered mixed and inconclusive. The studies are just too small, and the data isn't strong enough to make any real medical recommendations.
So, where does that leave someone who is still considering CBD? The science isn't settled, but people are trying it anyway. If you fall into that category, let's go over some absolutely essential information you need to know to navigate your options as safely as possible.
First off, you're going to find CBD in a whole lot of different forms. Oils and tinctures that you take under your tongue are common because they work a little faster.
Capsules give you a really precise dose, but they take longer to kick in. Then you have topical lotions and creams for more localized joint pain, and of course edibles, like gummies, which are a simple, discrete option. Each one just works a little differently.
Okay, this next part is a really, really big deal. With the exception of one specific prescription drug for epilepsy, the CBD market is completely unregulated by the FDA. And that creates a huge problem, because it means you have absolutely no guarantee that the product in the bottle actually matches what's on the label. It could have less CBD, it could have more THC, or it could even have harmful contaminants.
But of all the warnings we can give, this is the most critical one. CBD can interact with other medications. If you are taking blood thinners like warfarin, certain heart medications, or really any drug that comes with a grapefruit warning, you have to be extremely cautious. These interactions can be really serious. This is not a suggestion. It is vital that you speak with your doctor before ever trying CBD.
Okay, we've covered the hope, we've covered the hype, and we've covered some pretty serious considerations. So what's the final takeaway as we look towards the future? It all really comes down to this. The science is hopeful, but it is not proven. Not yet. Those early lab studies and the small trials on non-motor symptoms, they show real potential. But the large-scale clinical evidence that we need to actually confirm those benefits, it just isn't there yet. This whole field of research is really still just getting started.
And that leads us right to our final question. The research we have today isn't a final answer. It's more like a foundation. So as we move forward, will the larger, better designed clinical trials that everybody agrees we need, will they finally give us a clear answer? Will they be the key to unlocking the true potential of CBD for the millions of people living with Parkinson's around the world? Honestly, only time and a lot more science will tell.